like a bit for our listeners to just very, very small introduction, because we always put all the information in the below text, and we give several other further information, including books, articles, and so on and so forth. So actually, as an associated professor of exhibition studies at Oslo National Academy of the Arts, I also found that you also work for a public art agency in Sweden.
Yes.
Which is we were also in a connection for this project as well, and very interesting. I will put this information for, because maybe we can begin with your experience and practice for Gothenburg International Biennial for Contemporary Art. Which you were curator for 2019 and 2021. So we will discuss in our knowledge transfer discussion about curatorial strategies, how we can deliver a context or make a contextualization of contested monuments or public art or art in general. Maybe we can approach, because you have an intensive practice about this, what is the role of artists as mediators or not, or maybe they are just one of the stakeholders in any other way. And maybe why not? Maybe we can follow this idea apropos permanent exhibitions and temporary exhibition, and if temporary exhibition can have a long-lasting impact, maybe a longer-lasting impact than permanent exhibitions, taking into consideration that biennales, as many of us know, are very focused, very intense experiences, and then they disperse again. So maybe we can begin with this idea that as biennales as sites of historical narration. This is also the title of the book that you have edited into 2022. And yeah, I will say nothing. Please give us some details. Maybe you can begin with the book and then extend it to your practice in the Gothenburg Biennale.
Yes. So with Gothenburg Biennial, it's a good example to start with, because I knew Gothenburg as a city quite well before I got the assignment, because I had worked there as a freelance curator before, and I had been there as a private person, and I thought I knew the city. But when they gave me the assignment to curate the Biennial and to do 2 editions, they told me that the 2nd edition would coincide with the city celebrating its 400-year anniversary. So already there, it felt like history is the context here. And I began to look again at Gothenburg's history from a new perspective, I guess, because now I had to relate to it myself and construct some kind of project from it. And the kind of usual way that the history of Gothenburg is told, and the way it was also promoted, let's say, in the initial materials and public narratives connected to this anniversary coming up, was of a city that was actually founded in the 1600s as a trade place, as Sweden's contact with the global trade community, let's say. And it still is Sweden's sort of window to the Atlantic, for sure. That's how it's often framed. And then it also became an industrial town. But I realized that there was almost nothing written about the colonial implications of being a trade port from the 1600s and onwards. And I also understood, because a previous curatorial research of mine, and that produced several projects, in other places in Sweden and elsewhere was to do with extractivism, mining of various kinds. So I had looked a lot at Swedish iron mining. And what I realized was that Gothenburg was actually the city where the Swedish iron that had been mined in other parts of the country was being shipped out. And I began to follow the trade routes there, and I understood that Swedish iron was actually a key product in the transatlantic slave trade in the 1600s and onwards, used to build warships and weapons and shackles and chains, and also as currency in trading slaves with Africa. And I came across a small reference, actually in the Historical Museum in Gothenburg, but only a small paragraph referring to a particular plot of land in the harbor of Gothenburg called the French plot of land. And it explained that this particular plot of land had been exchanged between the French Empire and the Swedish king, giving Sweden an island and the Caribbean. And the French got a trading spot in this harbor, which was then very active on an international level. And I realized that here was a whole colonial history that I had never been told growing up in Sweden and going to school and all of this. And also it was not really present in the public narrative at that point about that the city was telling about itself. So there was a little paragraph in the Historical Museum, but nothing really about it in any other museum and so on. So I went to this plot of land, and it was there was no signage or anything of the history. It was completely anonymous, apart from some artworks that had been commissioned in modern times. So basically, let me think now, in the now I've forgotten all the dates here, but 1920s, 30s, 40s, and so on, by big shipping companies that had happened to place, I don't know how coincidentally, but they had placed their headquarters there. They had nothing to do with this colonial Caribbean history, but it was some kind of overlap in public space of these histories. And the only trace were these artworks, actually, that in themselves, although they had been commissioned, in the 1900s, so 300 years after the colonial start of the colonial times there, they were quite racist. They were very violent. They were sort of executed by famous Gothenburg-based artists at the time. Arvid Bryt and I've now forgotten the other. I write about this in my article that I can send you afterwards. In a sort of naive aesthetic that had been very popular at that time, almost fairy tale-like, but with racist and sexist stereotypes. And also depicting quite violent confrontations between Swedish tradesmen and sailors and sort of indigenous populations in other parts of the world. And this for me really was a sort of clue that I need to invite contemporary artists to respond to this heritage, because the only way it's really visible in public space is through these artworks. So there was a direct correspondence there, because you ask about the role of the artist in all of this. And I felt that, the role of the artwork here is extremely important, because although these artworks actually were offensive, they were the only traces left of this history. And it also became very clear to me that it's not that this history is hidden, actually. It's actually there in front of us in these images. It's just that we have been trained not to see them. So how can the Biennial and these contemporary artists make us see these things once again, and not only see them, as they were then, but understand them today. So to make a direct connection between the colonial history, to place Sweden in that history, because I think, the image of Sweden from modern times has often been this very nice place, very innocent. Oh, it's so lovely. This is at least what I meet all the time, traveling and so on. It's of course great. You're like, oh, well,
It is
but
lovely.
well, it is lovely, but of course it has a shadow side that is often ignored for various reasons, both inside the country and outside. It's nice to have an example of a successful, social democracy, so on, but the link between how that social democracy and that prosperous industrial country that grew out up in modernity, how that directly connects with the colonial economy of the past and still ongoing is quite rarely discussed. So that was the starting point, and of course it was a biennial, so it's a temporary exhibition. And also with a budget, we neither had the mandate nor the budget to make any permanent artworks. So it was clear to us from the beginning that what we have to do is temporary interventions somehow. But we also wanted to discuss this, have a debate around it. And we started in parallel a kind of discursive project called Possible Monuments, ? Because this was 2019. It was, and I think Black Lives Matter was really building. I think it's maybe, now my dates are a little bit muddled here, but in 2020, perhaps it really kind of started. And there was a big movement. So our questions came before then, but it became very clear that, wow, this is an extremely hot topic, actually. And a lot of monuments were being torn down in the more classic colonial countries like Britain and Portugal and so on. In the US, there were big protests. So we were interested in asking, is there a possible monument? Like, is that form at all interesting today? Or is it very outmoded? What can it bring? What's the problems with these kind of permanent forms of public presence? What do they bring? What problems are associated with them? So we engaged 7 different artists, both Swedish and international, and also 2 writers, to address this question from within their own research and their own practice, and to think specifically about this plot of land, because it's a interesting, complicated plot of land where not only there is this colonial history, but it has continued to be a trade place for trade, but it also has ties to migration. It was the site, or very close by, where a lot of Swedish people migrated at the end of the 19th century to the US. So there's many sort of intersecting narratives that, of course, are somehow also connected. So we invited quite a wide range of artists, some who had specific ties to the Caribbean, others who had nothing to do with this, or Swedish artists who had dealt with colonial questions and so on. Also US artists, and also artists working with different media, because we wanted to ask the question, how can we make interventions here? Can we imagine monuments today that are completely performative or digital? What are the expectations of a monument? So that's a project that we got external funding for, And it was a collaboration with the Public Art Agency Sweden also. And we organized a number of seminars and commissioned proposals actually from these artists, basically asking, should there be a monument here commemorating this site somehow? In which case, how should it look like? Or if not, please, respond to why not. So that's what we started with.
So, were there any possible monuments to be placed there, or what? Or the outcome needed to be only on a temporary basis schedule, or?
Yeah, I mean, we could not realize any of these monuments, but they were, and I happen to have a copy of the book here, this Biennial's sites.
It's online, yeah.
Yes. So we do document it. There's also a website, actually, where you can look at this possible monuments project. I believe the website is still up, and you can read their proposals and so on. I mean, it's interesting, this format of a proposal, what that can bring. We wanted also the proposals to be, we told the artists, you have complete freedom in a sense, that there's no fixed budget, there's no limitation. So it's also interesting to think, how far can you go? Unfortunately, actually, none of them went completely far, let's say, in the sense that we didn't get any completely immaterial or digital monuments and so on. We had one proposal by Jimmy Robert, which was a kind of actual exchange of soil between Gothenburg and Saint Bartholomew in the Caribbean, this island, which was beautiful, but impossible for us to realize. But it was also interesting because he works a lot with performance. So it was a kind of combination of a physical shift of earth between these places. But also his idea was that the monument would be activated performatively on a recurring basis. So like once a year as a sort of memory tradition. And he wanted to work with school children to do this, to somehow also sustain the memory and to place the body of the citizens, in a way, in this case, these school children, on that plot of land, and to ask themselves, where am I situated in relationship to this history? Like, how has it impacted who I am today? So instead of just putting a kind of memorial or an image or a reading of the past, it was much more an ambition to continuously ask, how are we situated in relationship to this history? And perhaps that is a way also for us in this conversation to talk a bit about the potentials of, let's say, the biennial as a format or the temporary project. And I've written another text about this, which is in a book published by the Public Art Agency. I've now forgotten the title of the text, but it's about temporarily recurring projects like a biennial as a sort of in-between point between the permanent and the temporary.
Yeah, very almost philosophical, but also very socially engaging method, because and also a lot of freedom there, because actually the monument is, you are stuck with it. I mean, you put it after all the commissioning and all the budgeting and that. But in this case, when you have this recurrent actually monument, you have a recurrent monument. Actually, yeah, very interesting indeed. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah, please.
It's a way to acknowledge that history is constantly being reread in relationship to the present. So we understand the past in different ways as our own present is changing. So I think the return to a certain site or a certain set of problems is actually a really interesting method in relationship to the narration of history or memory culture. To track something over time in the present rather than fixating a statement about the past in one time.
And actually, it can be also a possibility to maybe to not to get to that acute point, for example, because you mentioned the Black Lives Matter and all the toppling down of sculptures, because those sculptures were there for decades and nobody could care less.
Yeah.
But when this relationship with the present changed, then the narrative changed, and you could see it physically embodying in protest and the toppling down sculptures or public monuments. So maybe this is like you are doing updates. What is the present? How do we look at the past from this point of view? And this is more easing this possible conflict.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's quite complicated because if we don't have any permanent, I mean, nothing is permanent, but like for example, on this plot of land in Gothenburg, if these artworks had not been there, maybe my response to that site would have been different. Now it felt like, wow, there are voices here, that needs to be contested. If we take away those voices, we also kind of erase maybe the problems in our own history, and we can continue pretending that we don't see them. So I feel quite, I don't have a simple answer to this question, if we should indeed build any type of permanent monuments or what we should do with the ones that are still standing. I do believe that every culture needs to learn to live with its own shadows. We need to integrate them and to acknowledge them in our histories. So to completely remove these ghosts, let's say, is perhaps not the right thing to do. At the same time, we know that historical monuments often look very powerful and very imposing, and they somehow legitimize certain perspectives. So there is a clear tension there. And they can, of course, also be mobilized for the wrong reasons, not only people protesting against them, but also, let's say fascist movements and so on, gathering around certain symbols that were produced historically and have not been removed. So we did another project in Gothenburg, which was actually relating to this sculpture here, which was made by a historical Swedish artist called Carl Milles, and it's showing a very famous ship that set sail from Gothenburg, also in the 1600s, to the Americas, and was the first kind of colonization ship from Sweden. Sweden had a colony in Delaware in the US from 1632, I believe it was, for some decades, and this is a commemoration of that ship, and around it are, like, you can't really see it now, but it's sort of scenes. It's actually, like, again, Swedish sailors and soldiers negotiating with the indigenous populations in the Native Americans. And it's terrible texts around these scenes. Like, for example, it says the Swedes civilized this part of the world and so on. So the narrative of this sculpture is today absolutely outrageous, but still it stands there in the harbor. So we invited an artist, Daniela Ortiz, Peruvian artist, to do a more performative intervention. So yeah, so she kind of tied. She had made these flags that were commemorating moments of resistance in colonial history across several different countries. And then she did a performance in relationship to that. And her point being that, resistance is as old as oppression. There's always been resistance. Yeah. But of course, then her performance is over and the textiles disappear and that ship still stands there.
Yeah, I think it would be maybe a good time to mention that concept of spatial narration that I found in your work. Last year you had a project, a conference, and I've seen a bit of an explanation, but maybe you can give us more details, because I think that what we are talking now, it's about narration or maybe narratives, so that we can have a plural. So yeah, please give us some details.
In relationship to spatial narration, I have worked with it, and my interest in it is primarily connected to exhibitions. So not really public space so much, but more how we construct or how we narrate rather through space in the way we configure exhibitions, primarily group exhibitions, let's say, where different positions are brought together to be in relation with each other. So that's how I've been working with it.
Do you think it can be applied to outdoor or to public art? Because, well, when you expect public art, you would expect one or two or a group, but maybe this type of approach, like speciality. I mean, when you think the artwork in relation with not only with the other artwork, but with the whole space. I mean, with the pavement, with the building, with the passers-by, which is always temporary because they are passers-by. So, do you think this the concepts and the ideas and the flux that you thought of it can be also applied in outdoor?
Absolutely. I mean, architecture and town planning and so on is, of course, spatial narration. The way power is constructed in a city and how people's movements are encouraged or structured in certain ways and so on. So yes, I mean, design, architecture, town planning, all of this is spatial narration also. So public art, of course, can work with this in many, many different ways and has done also. Yeah, so where do you encounter something? How do you encounter it? Is it something you... I mean, at its basic level, spatial narration is really about, creating certain encounters, I guess. Like, is there something blocking your path, or is it something you stumble upon, or is it something that you discover in many different places in a city that maybe is not so in your face, but it's something over time that you begin to connect? This is also what I like very much about the biennial format, actually, because that is also a way you can use it. And I was trying to do that also as a form of spatial narration, in the sense that you can connect different sites in the city that are not usually connected. So you can tell a different story about the city by having a project, a biennial, where you say, the sites that we are looking at, we're connecting this plot of land with the colonial history, with the Natural History Museum, and the industrial, old factory, and the Kunsthalle, for example. Like, what do these spaces have in common? And what type of, epistemological or ideological paradigm have produced these spaces? And how do they relate to each other? how does the white cube relate to the colonial capitalist violence, for example? The idea of a space where you can just, that is empty, that you can put anything and then you erase it and you start a new story. Like this whole way of thinking about a territory, let's say, is actually very connected to the colonial idea. We can just go to the Americas. There's nothing there. We just erase the culture that is there. We say that it's not even a culture, and then we build a whole new world. Yeah. So that's another way of thinking about spatial narration, I guess.
As final remarks, I would like to ask you, because you also mentioned the possible monuments of I would say not only a project but the concept in itself, and also the Biennial format, which is presumably following certain steps, commissioning, exhibiting, and then everything is set up to go. How would you see if you would like to, you as well, in general, not you as a person or as an institution, if someone wants to put a public art, a monument in the public space, how would you begin? Would you begin with talking to the neighbors, to the artist, to the museum of the neighbor or the municipality? How would you take into consideration all these stakeholders, as we call them, and who would have the priority? Would it be an artist or an anthropologist, or it can be just normal people living in next door, the space that you would like to take into consideration? Should it be, I don't know, cultural authority? It's an agency. It's someone that has specialist in history, in art, and so on and so forth. So how would you see that type of process?
I think it depends completely on what type of monument we're talking about and what is it commemorating. I don't think there's a generic answer to any of these questions, because it depends what kind of question or history is at stake. If it's something that connects with a very particular group of people, or if it's like a national story, or if it's to do with one particular person that might, be an icon of something, or if you want the monument to be a meeting place. So I think it really depends what kind of monument, let's say, it is. And what else was I thinking? Yes, and I also do think it does matter who is the initiator, who is who is asking for what here. That really, really makes a difference. Gothenburg is an interesting example as a city, because, so in the Biennial project, in our project, these possible monuments, it was me, I'm asking the question, should we have a monument here? So, and I felt also a bit weird about that, because my position was, okay, I'm a Swedish person. I'm invited here to deal with the history of this city, of this country somehow. This is my history. I have a responsibility for talking about this, because nobody told me when I was learning about my own heritage that we had this colonial past. So that was the angle I came into the question. But then, it opens up to who should we be commemorating? And from what perspective? And and who am I to decide that? So it immediately became a very complicated question, and we discussed this with many different people and in different forums and different discussions and so on. And I think if it would become reality, if the city would say, we would like to commemorate somehow, or not forget about the colonial relations that actually built this city, then a very concrete sort of sequence of events would follow. And in every step, there would have to be questions asked and different perspectives included and so on. So I don't think it's possible to give a generic answer, but
yes, no, it was a perfect example. Actually, the question was also having in mind the other conversation in this project as well, and in also in my practice, because actually, yes, it does matter who begins the conversation, who pays for the who pays for the materials, and if it's an artist or not, if it's a community engagement motive, and not necessarily it doesn't matter really the outcome, but it matters, the process matters. And then this type of monument would be a show of power, a show of identity, a show of trauma or something. So actually, yes, definitely it depends. It's very much depends on who would initiate it and for what purpose. So yeah, but in your case, what you are telling us about, actually, I think is what you mentioned is very overlapping motives. So actually, you can have different views upon that particular spot. So I think it's a lot to discuss, or maybe it's not a good time to erect something that would be permanent, because there are ongoing discussions, there are ongoing narratives forming, and that's why actually you cannot put something which is, well, more or less permanent. Let's be optimistic.
Yeah, maybe, but at the same time, then we risk that certain issues are ignored or are not allowed to take space in the city as well. So it's a fine balance, because like these artworks that were the historical artworks that I saw in this plot of land, that they were commissioned by these commercial shipping companies. So why should we be surrounded with their stories about themselves?
Yeah, food for thought for the next biennial.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you so much. It was, I mean, it's great. We should discuss more often, maybe
Absolutely.
spark for new concepts. Thank you so much. And
You're very welcome.
yeah, we will also give the links and to also to the work that you mentioned, and also to the books that I mentioned that you also show us, and yeah, for further reading and further food for thought.